Hi, my name is Colin Fain. I'm the CEO of Agronometrics, and today I want to talk to you about why blueberry prices have kind of been staying as high as they've been. In a previous episode, I forecast that the prices would go down quite a bit. They were at an all-time high earlier on in the season. Around week 43, we saw prices of $15 per kilo. And then they started descending. And what we said in that video was that as the volumes came up, as Peruvian season gained steam after a really late start, we thought that the prices, well, I thought that the prices were going to go down and match up with last year's level. And what we saw was that they did not. They kind of stayed level. We can actually dive into this in a bit more detail. Looking at the chart by history. And what we want to do is compare from week 26 to 25. And we'll cut out all the previous years. And so here we get a really good picture of kind of like what the markets, at least on the spot markets, have looked like over the last time. So we thought at this point that the prices were going to go down and possibly meet last year's level of around $5 a kilo. Instead, they've stayed up around $7, $8 a kilo. What did the volumes do in this time? So we're going to do the same exercise. We'll pull this into data navigation and look at the chart from week 26 to 25. Kind of cut out all the noise. And the first video that we made predicting, which the link will be down in the description, looked at the volumes right at the peak of the season, which was around week 43. Prices were really high, and then we thought that they were going to come down and they were going to match up with last year's levels. So the volumes did that, and they were more or less dancing around last year's level for about 5 weeks until week 51. And so we thought that during this period, the pricing would go down to last year's level. So why didn't it? And my theory, at the very least, is kind of going through this big deficit that we saw here. That was the entire Peruvian season from week 34 to week 47. Inventories were probably very, very, very low. So as excess volume came into the market, more volume was held off in inventories to kind of maintain the pricing. This means normally that the quality of the fruit that reaches retail in that window is going to be not as high a quality. Obviously, a blueberry today is of more quality than a blueberry tomorrow. And then we came into this little deficit down here, which was given by Peru kind of sending the same volumes that they've been sending in previous years, and a lower than expected supply, or lower than last year's supply, from Mexico and Chile. And we can dive into that in a little bit more detail. So we can go to Chile, which is just getting started and is the other big player in the market. And over the last couple of weeks, we can see this big deficit that they've had in their production for their own production reasons. So the Chilean, this is from our story section. The Chilean season is expected to be 13% down. They had some rain issues at the beginning of the season, as well as to a certain extent El Nino. There's more information within the stories article. That'll be also down in the description. And then Mexico, which is the other big player this time of the year, is also down on their season. So, and you can see what this development has looked like. And so you pair that with the same volumes that Peru normally sends, and those are the three big players in the market, or those are kind of the three players in the market right now. We came up with, or where did this go? Here we go. We can look at all. And we came up with this overall deficit, particularly in weeks 52 and week 1. So now we're in week 2. We're seeing this big bump in production, or at least in volumes coming in. And a big chunk of that is Chile. And a surprising chunk of that is Peru. So we can look at the volumes coming in by origin. And we can see this big bump from Peru right in week 2. If we actually extend more time, Chile will pop out of others. We're looking at the top 3 or the top 5 origins. And when we're just looking at that narrow window, Chile doesn't qualify as one of the top 5. But when we look at more than a year, it definitely stands out. So these 2 increasing origins are the ones that are bringing all the volume to the market right now. And as a result, that is increasing pressure. We're starting to see that in the prices. Today's price in particular saw a decrease for the first time in a while. That can be seen if we pull up this information daily. And that was mostly because of the Chilean prices that are being registered. So again, clean it up. We can see it was at 8.15 on day 12 of the year. And then this was yesterday's price, and it was at $7.94. Chile's price actually came in at $7.11 for this day. So now the question is, all right, this is the scenario that we got painted. How will this likely play out as the season progresses? Are these prices going to go down? Are these prices going to go up? And I don't have a mathematical forecast per se. What we can look at is the information that we have on hand. There's 3 major players that are going to kind of dominate the market for the next couple weeks. So this is the first couple weeks of the year. And we can see it's pretty much Chile, Mexico, and Peru. For all intents and purposes, there's no other real participant in the market. Coming into the beginning of, or kind of early spring or mid-spring, where the US production starts to have more of an impact, particularly the volumes coming out of Florida. So we can look at we don't have exact forecasts from Chile. We know that they're 13% down. So that's going to be a consideration that technically would have that would put pressure to increase the prices. From Mexico, even though they have been down coming into the season, they're expecting 81,000 metric tons, and that's up from 74,800. So that's about an 8% increase. And given that they're short at the beginning of the season, which is to be expected, the normal pricing in Peru's window has been very, very competitive, to put it politically. Because of that, you're seeing all the early season production out of Chile and all the early season production out of Peru kind of drain out of the market and be more and more concentrated into kind of their particular window where they have less competition from other sources. So as a consequence, I think it's reasonable to expect that the rest of the Mexican season will see much higher volume should this forecast play out. And that will have a downward effect on prices. So these 2 may balance out. The other big player, remember, is Peru. They're still there. They're still very relevant. And the question is kind of what role will Peru have? There's been a lot of forecasts thrown out, but it's having a very peculiar behavior this year, in particular. And so we can go into the global trade data. We look at Peruvian exports, and what this gives us is a heads up on what's going to get to the US market. I don't think a round number as to a forecast will give us a clean idea of how this curve will eventually develop. So we're going to open this chart and look at it weekly by history. And this is a really interesting development. So we'll clean it up and compare this year's exports to last year's exports. We covered in previous videos kind of what the beginning of the season looked like. There was this big shortfall because of El Nino, the lack of production that was coming out of Peru. Week 43, where we saw the highest prices in the market, was the peak of their exports. And then it's kind of leveled off from there. For the previous 5 weeks, say, it's been more or less at last year's level. And then in the previous 5 weeks, we've seen that volumes of exports have nearly doubled what they exported the previous year. If kind of what at least I'm hearing from different sources in the market, a lot of this has to do with the pruning. So they haven't been pruning their plants to be able to extract kind of as much value as they can from the fruit. And as a consequence, you're getting this overproduction later in the season that was a bit unexpected. This will just be hitting. So the volumes that were heading out in week 50 will just be hitting the market pretty much now. And I think kind of an accumulation of these volumes are what we're seeing. If we go, I guess there's several ways of looking at it. But if we go to the latest data that we have and we see this big uptake from Peru, I'm guessing a good amount of that volume that's a part of this uptick is coming from these volumes that just were leaving Peru on week 50. And this means that we're going to have a lot more volume on hand for the next couple weeks. Should Mexico pick up its production and live up to its expectations of 81 million tons or 81,000 tons, then, and I kind of had this forecast before, but I would guess that the pressure on prices is going to continue and we will see lower prices than we've seen for the last couple weeks. Inventories aside, inventories are a short-term solution. When they built up right after Peru's peak reached the US, they had a respite, given that Mexico and Chile were shorter than they were the previous year. Now, Chile looks to continue to be short, maybe not as much as they were in the first couple weeks. Again, they're also driving production out of the first part of their season into kind of the bulk where they have less competition to fight against. But this increase in production from Peru may have a serious effect. It's kind of unexpected, and I think it's also a direct consequence of El Nino, and how producers are choosing to manage their crop. So what this means is for next year, the plants that were not pruned that are still producing are not going to be productive in the heart of their season, where Peru's the only player and they typically see the best pricing. And as a consequence, they'll put downward pressure on today's market. I mean, who knows? This is a forecast. Every forecast is wrong. Hopefully some forecasts are useful, and hopefully you guys find this information useful.